Hello and welcome to Keep Right On, a Birmingham City podcast brought to you from us here at Birmingham Live. I'm Brian Dick and I'm joined for the first time this year by Alex Dicken, our Birmingham City reporter. And I suppose we should kick off, Alex, by wishing all our listeners and followers and watchers a happy 2026 and wishing yourself one as well. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. And hopefully our listeners and followers stay with us throughout the year. We know we can be difficult at times, especially when we don't turn up after defeats, which is what we did over Christmas. We're back here fresh after a 3-2 win over the league leaders to celebrate and wax lyrical, aren't we, Brian?
Yeah, and suddenly we're all up for questions. Yeah, exactly. If it's possible to be fair weather podcasters, we may have slipped into that situation over Christmas. We probably should state the fact that you took the second half of 2025 off, didn't you? Which is why it was difficult for us to marry it. But we are back anyway. Let's look forward. Let's, as you say, refer to Sunday's 3-2 victory over Coventry City. We're going to look at what was good at Blues, assess the performance of Marvin Ducksch and Lewis Kumas, see his situation, assess Kai Wagner's debut. We're going to also have a quick look back to the rest of Christmas, which wasn't as happy as yesterday's game. Assess the playoff situation in the league table, and then have a look forward into the rest of the transfer window. So without further ado, let's kick on. Alex, main takeaway from yesterday, Birmingham City 3, Coventry City 2?
Just that, speaking to someone straight after the full-time whistle, we said that, that is a team that was playing for its manager today. Chris Davies, the noises weren't that he was under massive pressure and that, he needs to win this game. But, he's not silly. He understood that going into that game, they hadn't won 7 matches. Blues were 9 points away from the playoff places. And, Tom Wagner, I think it very recently has made it clear that they're still a target in the playoff places. So, they needed that victory for the manager, for the supporters as well, who have been very frustrated over the Christmas period. And the players, I wouldn't say it was vintage Birmingham City. I wouldn't say it was their best performance of the season, but in terms of quality. But in terms of, work ethic, desire, passion, commitment, I thought they were outstanding, and they battled Coventry from first minute to last, and on effort alone deserved to come out with their 3 points.
Yeah, we didn't get what we wanted for Christmas, which was a solution to the home and away issue, did we? Blues were very much... they were back to Lions again, weren't they, having been Lemmings away from home at Watford just a few days earlier. But, as you say, I think my main takeaway was the fact that these players still are playing for Chris Davies. And I don't know that I've ever really honestly thought to myself that, hang on, that these players are a bit checked out. Watford, I guess, would have been a tough watch. Did you start to wonder that a little bit yourself at Watford?
I think in terms of the way they played at Watford, it can just look like, there wasn't a great deal of energy in the way they played, and fans were frustrated with the playing style. Fans turned a little bit on that playing style, and there were songs quite early on, really. And I put that to Chris Davies afterwards, and I don't think his response did much to appease those supporters who were angry about the way the team had played. In terms of, they were quite passive and slow in and around Watford's box or half, and they never really looked like breaking Watford down. And every time Watford got the ball, they just seemed like they could score a goal. And I think in the first half, Watford were 2-0 up and didn't really get out of first gear. So that was a big frustration. But it was, again, home and away, it's like chalk and cheese, isn't it? They're fantastic in terms of their energy levels and their running power at home, whereas away it was a different story. But then again, it was a very different team, wasn't it, in terms of personnel?
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. Let's not paint yesterday's performance as Blues came out from minute one and sort of were on the front foot and were dominating Coventry. It was much more of a to and fro game than we tend to have seen at St Andrews. Not many teams do come and have an absolute go at Blues in the way that Coventry did. But in terms of energy and intensity and tempo, it was a familiar looking home performance, wasn't it? The man that took all of the plaudits, the Man of the Match award, and very modestly posted on social media afterwards that big players turn up in big games was Marvin Ducksch.
Watford wasn't a big game.
No, no. I have some thoughts about that, but I'll let you empty your chamber first. What did you make of Ducksch's performance?
I mean, he played like we know that he can. He was exceptional.
He played like we know he should, Alex. Is
we know he can and should. He was exceptional, really. When Marvin Ducksch plays 1 and 2 touch football, there probably isn't a better player in the Championship in the way that he does it. Balls coming into him, he's flicking it here, there, and everywhere, finding his teammates and making runs off it. Even in the first goal that he scored, it was his flick inside to Kumas, I think. It was then worked to Peck and over to the debutant Wagner, who puts a lovely first time cross, and the finish is absolutely sublime, isn't it? And then the second goal, Carl Rushworth has probably got a few question marks about his own performance there, but still a good finish at the near post. And there was kind of a clear there's a lot of emotion in his celebration, and maybe a little bit of a kind of message to those who've doubted him and criticised him in recent weeks. Because let's face it, for the 7 or 8 games before Coventry, he didn't do a fat lot. So yeah, a really good response from Marvin Ducksch. But as Chris Davies alluded to in his press conference post match, they need to kind of see that level more regularly. They need to keep him at that level, because he can be a match winner in the Championship, as he's proven in that game yesterday against Coventry, as against Norwich City, in those 4-0 victories as well against Portsmouth and Millwall. He was fantastic too. So he needs to be a difference maker.
Absolutely my thoughts entirely, if that's what Chris Davies said. We're going back to November the 22nd until the last time we thought Marvin Ducksch is too good for the Championship and, could be a key player for Birmingham City. That was the 2 goals he scored in the 4-1 win against Norwich. The following game, he did score against West Brom with that late header, the equaliser. But at that point, I think he was about to be substituted, and you and I were sat together shaking our heads at the fact he'd barely moved. And it shouldn't take, I don't think, a telling off if that's what happened in his exchange with supporters at Watford. It shouldn't take that sort of situation for him to be producing those displays more than once every 2 months. He's a big player for Birmingham City. He was brought in to score goals and unlock defences. And yes, okay, he might not want to be the centre forward and the target man. But we've seen against Norwich and against Coventry that he can win for first contacts. He can win headers. In fact, he got the first contact in both of his goals, didn't he? It was him that laid it off to Patrick Roberts for the second goal as well. For him to go on social media and then say big players turn up in big games, all the games are big, all the games are worth 3 points. And I want to see something more assertive and more energetic more regularly. And I don't think that's unfair. I'm delighted he played as well as he did. And I think you named him man of the match, and I think he was rightly man of the match. But it was a performance so out of keeping with, some of the seemingly disinterested stuff. I've never accused a player of being disinterested. But, the energy levels were low in previous games, and it needs to be like this every time.
Yeah, we need to see that, and not necessarily against Cambridge in the FA Cup, because I'm not sure he'll play in that game, but against Swansea, against Sheffield Wednesday, against some of the lesser lights in the Championship when the Sky Sports cameras aren't there. So yeah, he's like you said, Brony. He is, in his own words, he is a big player, and they do need to see him in all the Championship games, because every Championship game is worth 3 points. And if Blues are going to get near to those playoff places, which looks a bit unlikely now, then they're going to need a lot of 3 points.
Yeah, that's fine. They can go on a run. We'll talk about the league table and whether it's unlikely or not in a bit. But, I haven't written them off, to be honest, at this stage. So, let's move on to Lewis Kumas. Obviously, he scored his first goal. Can we describe it as a good overall performance?
His best performance, I would say.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Both with the ball and without it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's not a lot to go from there, is there? Because he's not started that many games, and he hasn't, let's be honest, he hasn't really impressed that much. It's been a very disappointing loan as far as he's concerned, as far as Blues are concerned. And to be honest, I would have presumed that he would go back to Liverpool and be redistributed elsewhere this month. maybe that goal and that start will change things. Maybe that can be kind of the springboard that he needs to get going in the second half of the season and make this loan, or turn this loan into what he thought it would be at the start. I was really impressed by him against Coventry. I thought his running power was very helpful to the way Blues wanted to play in that particular game. I thought he did well enough defensively against Milan Van Eyck, who is probably for me the best Championship right back. He helped out Kai Wagner an awful lot, which was needed because he was coming into the game after one full training session in 6 weeks. So I was impressed by Kumas. Took his goal quite well as well. I thought he might have taken an extra touch, one touch too many, but he squeezed it in. So that needs to be the start for him. And I say needs to be the start. If he is still here come the end of January, then you'd hope for more performances like that.
Yeah, to be fair to him, he's only made 5 Championship starts, hasn't he, this season?
Yeah.
But, in the way you'd say the same for Ducksch, yesterday's performance looked like the recruitment team probably thought it would look like when they identified him in the summer. I thought he'd actually underhit his finish and sort of gave the defender too much of a chance once he'd gone round Rushworth. I think on his day, he is quite a powerful ball carrier, isn't he? And, his energy and his work rate and his desire to do the dirty side of things, is good for if you want to sort of go on the stereotype of a young winger coming from a Premier League giant. He's more athlete than technician for me, Lewis Kumas, I would say. And so, I wouldn't necessarily throw the bathwater out or, just call an end to it. But I'd let it run, I think, for another 2 or 3 weeks for the rest of January, and then be having half an eye on sourcing a plan B as well. But it is a promising start, and hopefully it's food for thought. But I suppose the minute Dimmy's fit, Dimmy comes back in, and Kumas is back in the same boat, isn't he?
Yeah, that's the difficulty, I suppose. And it's probably, I think, going to be maybe more him than Blues that determines whether this loan goes on, because, he was quite, brashing when he joined the club in saying that he wanted to be, a main player and, help a team get promoted to the Premier League. So it hasn't been that first half of the season, has it? So hopefully, it can improve. But like you say, Bri, Demarai Gray is always going to have that left wing spot. Speaking about the guy who played behind Kumas, Kai Wagner. It wasn't bad as far as debuts go, was it, Brian?
It was absolutely sensational, wasn't it? I thought it was a bold signing. I will admit, when we got news about it a few days ago, I just sort of sighed and I thought, why can't they just sign an established Championship centre back, left back, someone who knows the league with a proven track record? I'm sat there. I'm going back to my old failing. I know I have a tendency to look at Wrexham's recruitment and go, "Oh, I would have liked him," but I'm not going to say that's been borne out. I think there are players that Wrexham recruited that I thought would have been perfect for Blues, but their pattern was established Championship players. And so when Wagner was sort of recruited, I thought, right, okay, it's another sort of left field addition. But I was impressed. He looks like a decent athlete. He looks like his positioning sense and the defensive side of his game is good. And I was mildly surprised to see him where he was, to put the ball over for Ducksch that early in a really important game. I think it would have been very easy for Chris Davis to have told Wagner to stay at home and not leave the left back berth and not expose Jack Robinson. But he was well forward. He was he the second or thirdest man furthest forward once Peck played the ball. So yeah, it was an impressive start, as you say, on the back of I think one training session. Did Chris Davis say?
Yeah, I mean,
barely spoken, hadn't they? So there couldn't have been too much tactical sort of tuition gone into that. So yeah, a really promising start, and you will be very interested to see how it plays out between him and Alex Cochrane now.
Yes, speaking to Kai Wagner afterwards, he actually said that Chris Davies basically simplified it and changed the system to allow him to play as he would have played for Philadelphia Union. Obviously, we know, looking at his numbers, assist numbers, that he's a very attacking fullback, and Cochrane hasn't really been that in the Blue system, has he? He's been a little bit more of an insurance policy. Someone will tuck inside from left back and play as an additional centre back in possession, or tuck into midfield sometimes. Whereas Wagner was very much.
To be fair, that's because the athlete's been at right back, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But Chris Davies did say afterwards that Cochrane's almost kind of created his own position, and I do think, Brian, that Cochrane is better at doing that than going forward, as we saw when Davies flipped the system for a little bit last season. I do think he's better at staying at home, but Wagner's a very different style of fullback. Not to say that he can't do the Cochrane role or try to do the Cochrane role, but it was more natural fullbacks, wasn't it, against Coventry? Tomoki Iwata wasn't, way more advanced than Wagner. They're both going at various times. And if anything, I think Wagner actually went forward a little bit more than Iwata did. So I think on first impressions, he was excellent. The only thing I don't want to do is go too overboard and, say he's the second coming of Christophe Dugarry. In a few games, he's not going to be any good. So we'll try to reserve some judgment, but the first impression was a very good one.
Yeah, big players playing big games. We know that. Let's not anoint him the second coming of Martin Granger, but a very promising start. And you were referring to the contrasting skill sets of Cochrane and Wagner there. Left back isn't a sort of role where you pick a horse for a course, is it? You want your back four to be nailed down. You want a settled back four, and I don't see a situation where Cochrane will maybe start away from home because he'll be a bit more defensively solid and sit in a bit more, and then Wagner plays at home. There will be a number one and a number two here, I think, in this situation, and it will be very interesting to see how it plays out.
I think so as well, but we're going to come on to the subject of a back three, and I could see them both playing together in that formation. If it was a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3 shape, as it was for the final 20 minutes against Coventry, I could see. I know Alex Cochrane's not the biggest man in the world, but I could see him playing as a left side centre back. With Wagner potentially as a wing back. I actually, speaking to Chris Davies a couple of weeks ago after one of their games, with all the injury issues, I said, could you play a back three? And he goes, I don't think we have the players. I don't think we've got anyone who can play wing back. But in Wagner, I think they've got probably somebody who could be a specialist left wing back who could play that position. So I think that's more of an option now as well.
And then you're looking at the right wing backs, potentially, say Samuel could be useful as a right wing back. Even Laird when he comes back.
Laird's made for that role, isn't he?
He really, I think he is. Yeah. You mentioned the three at the back, which was the next thing on the running order. It was almost like you did that on purpose. So Blues Davis brought on three substitutes, didn't he? As he made the decision to protect the lead, and it was obvious Coventry were pretty much on top and knocking at the door. Now let me get this right. So Cashin came on.
Cashin came on for Kumas first to go to a back three.
That's right. Yeah. And then 5 minutes later, Samsted, Willemsen, and Kyogo came on. That's right. So it was Samsted as the left wing back, wasn't it? And a back three of help me out, Neumann, Robinson, and Cashin, with Iwata as the right wing back. And Blues dropped into a 5-4-1. In some ways, I'd say addressing the no plan B accusation it's often levelled at Chris Davies. I thought it was a good move. Listen, 5-4-1 at home, it's not the stuff of dreams in a deep block and 25% possession. It's not what Chris Davies imagined or the overarching philosophy, but it worked on the day, didn't it?
Yeah, and did you see Aaron Cashin flying forward in stoppage time down the left wing? So
I did.
You
think, all right, here's a question for you. He's made 50 yards down the left wing. He looks up, see Kyogo one-on-one. What's his thought process?
Call a flag. Definitely call a flag. Brian, I thought he worked well. I mean, Cashin for me it would be a useful left side centre back. I wouldn't necessarily want him in a back two as Blues have been playing, but in a back three on the left, I think that might play into his skill set and help the team overcome some of his shortcomings. Jack Robinson could play there as a left footer as well. Who knows? Maybe Blues, if Cashin does go back to Brighton as expected, they could sign another left side centre back who could play that position. So it gives the team another option. When we look at the away form and how terrible it's been this season, we've all been crying out for Chris Davies to do something a little bit different away from home, to try and get that victory. And maybe a back three is the option. They've probably, I think, when you play a back three, if you play a 3-4-3 or a 5-4-1, as you called it, the wide players or the wide forwards, you want them to be fast players and ball carriers, don't you? And Blues don't really have a lot of them. You think you're looking at maybe Kumas, Gray, maybe Stansfield. He's not an absolute fly, but he can carry the ball. So you'd want it to be Kumas and Gray, really, wouldn't you? So they might have to upgrade those positions for that to become a thing, I think.
Do you see a world in which Blues go to, where are they next in away
Swansea.
from home? Go to Swansea, maybe not Swansea, because you'd think, I suppose I'm getting at, will Chris Davies change his formation for an away game? I really thought 4-3-3 would have been a good option away to Watford, and it didn't happen. Swansea, Sheffield Wednesday, Oxford are the next away games. Blues are going to go and be quite positive there and try and impose themselves, aren't they? So it doesn't feel like they're going to be going to switch into a back five, anytime soon, does it?
No, maybe for a home game, because the home games coming up are more difficult than the away games, I think. So, yeah.
Just nice to see a tactical switch made and pay dividends. Good for Chris Davies to get that in the locker, and I hope some of the critics will have noticed that. So there are quite a few people not involved yesterday. We've spoken about Alex Cochrane. He wasn't involved. Mark Leonard, Keshi Anderson, Lyndon Dykes left out. Scott Wright returned to the bench. That was sort of snuck under the radar a little bit. Can you offer us any insight into, the four names that I've just mentioned there?
Yeah, so Cochrane, I believe, got injured at Watford. Keshi Anderson came off at Watford and looked like he was hobbling, but I was led to believe afterwards that was cramp. Maybe it's something more. Chris Davies was unbelievably coy when I asked him about the four absences after the game, in that he said a mixture of injury, tactical and team selection. So, Leonard and Dykes are the two that were obviously of most interest, because Leonard, I understood, wasn't injured. And then I followed up with will Leonard and Dykes be off this month? And he replied, we'll see. So I think it's quite clear that those two players, there's half a chance that they're going to be on their way this month. I'm told there are some interested clubs in Mark Leonard, and that Blues could look to upgrade or change that position around and bring in a new midfielder to replace him. He's obviously always kind of been the fall guy, hasn't he, in that midfield area. His best game this season was against Norwich, wasn't it, in that 4-1 victory, and then Peck was available from a shoulder injury 3 days later and came straight back into the starting 11. So maybe it's just not going to happen for Mark Leonard under Chris Davies, and I could definitely see him moving on, be it a loan deal or a permanent deal before the end of the month. Dykes has, I think it was kind of set in stone that Dykes had looked to move on this month anyway, having missed out on a transfer away at the end of the summer window. Charlton, I believe, are very interested in Lyndon Dykes, but whether Blues will allow him to join another Championship side, I'm not convinced, because he was going to go to Hibs in the summer in Scotland. I think they would obviously have preferred him to leave England. But Charlton, Lyndon Dykes knows London pretty well, doesn't he, having been there with QPR. So I'd imagine that would be a move that would really appeal to him, but whether Blues let that happen is another matter. Yeah,
and Charlton are definitely looking for a striker as well. So, that I'd be really surprised if Dykes is still a Blues player when the window shuts. I really would. He's got his own thoughts about the World Cup that's coming up in the summer. I can only imagine what he must have been thinking when Ducksch, wasn't performing very well for week after week after week, and Dykes wasn't even getting a look in. I could only imagine how that could have potentially found that quite vexatious.
And to be honest, Brian, it's admirable that Lyndon Dykes does want to move on and play, to be honest, because he could quite easily sit and have an easy life at Blues. I don't think him moving this month is going to massively affect anything in the Scotland camp. I think he's going to go to the World Cup either way, isn't he? Because he's not been a starter for Blues for the last 18 months, and he's still been involved in every Scotland squad and has still started key games for them.
You don't want to go on the back of 5 substitute appearances over 4 months, do you?
Well, that's why he wants to go in tip-top shape, in tip-top form. So fair play to him for looking to make that move.
Yeah, indeed. Right. Let's look back at the rest of Christmas. It's the ghosts of Christmas past, really, this, isn't it? Sheffield United 3, Blues 0. Do you want to do them all one by one, Alex, or just... no, let's not, because the Sheffield United game was a long time ago, wasn't it? Then there were 2 home games, a 1-1 draw with Derby, and then a 1-1 draw with Southampton, with a very patched-up team, and then 3-0 defeat at Watford. Clinging on for dear life at home, losing matches away from home. Say anything you want to say about that run of games, the festive period, Alex.
Yeah, my key thing, and I think I wrote this before the Sheffield United game, was that over those 5 games, they needed to at least kind of stay where they were in terms of the points difference to the playoffs, which I think was 4 or 5 at the time, maybe 6. And that's been extended. I know it's 7 at the time, but the team that is 6th is Watford, and they've played a game less than Blues. So theoretically, it's a 9-point gap to the playoffs still, because the next team is Millwall, I think. So the situation has got a little bit worse. Working the maths out from the first half of the season, Blues got 30 points from 23 games. 70 points is sometimes good enough to get you 5th or 6th in the playoff picture. So Blues would need 40 points from the second 23 games, and only Coventry and Middlesbrough managed to exceed that total in the first half of the season. So it is an uphill battle from here. Sheffield United, they were absolutely awful. They weren't helped by a set-piece goal they conceded 4 minutes in, that they would have worked on all week in training, because Sheffield United scored that exact goal 2 weeks prior against Stoke City. And then Tommy Doyle got sent off and the game's over. It's damage limitation. They kept it to 3, which, okay. It didn't look good. Derby, Blues probably should have been able to take advantage of Derby going down to 10 men quite early in that game. They didn't
started okay, didn't they, against Derby? They
did. They probably didn't move the ball quickly enough to when they went 1-0 down to get back in behind. Obviously, they conceded a terrible goal to Adjamang, which they've done that quite a bit over Christmas in terms of conceding bad goals. And then
again, that was an entirely predictable goal. We knew that Adjamang was going to be lurking sort of back post, coming in off the wing.
Yeah.
I think we talked about that before the game even took place. Or I certainly wrote about it, that Adjamang would be salivating at the prospect of going up against either Ruata or Samstead. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, and a patched up Blues, we were both there against Southampton, did okay. For 60, 70 minutes, they probably edged that game and were the better team. And then, they obviously had that moment where the referee has impeded Awata, and Southampton have eventually scored from that play. It must be said that Blues had opportunities to clear that ball before it ended up with Cameron Archer scoring the equaliser. But you can't get away from the fact that a referee's interference or involvement did play a part in Blues not winning that game. And then Watford was an unmitigated disaster. You kind of wanted to see an improvement on the road, but you looked at the team at the start of the game that Blues had to field because of injuries to key players and suspensions. Even Jay Stansfield missed that one with a dead leg, and you never really fancied them against a Watford side I'm looking at now, and I think a real threat for the top 2 in this league. They've got such quality. If they can come out of January with players like Chakfatadze, Loser, and Marma, then I think they could be a threat to the top 2. So with the 11 Blues had to field at Watford, I didn't really give them a prayer. 5 points. Thankfully, Blues had Coventry, because 2 points from 5 games would have been pretty disastrous, but 5 points from 5 games is a bogey in golf terms.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's under par. Yeah, or it's over par, under par, whichever the bad one is in terms of this discussion. 7 points outside the playoffs. Are in 13th place now, but they have played a game more than Watford. Clinging on, would we say, just about?
They need a very, very good run, and they need to go and win like 7 or 8 of 10 games or something, don't they, to give themselves a chance of making the playoffs, because there are so many teams between them and the playoffs as well that you're relying on slipping up. So I think it's a long shot based on the numbers I put forward earlier of them having to get roughly 40 points from the second 23 games. That's, over a season, if you're getting almost 2 points a game, that's top 2 form, isn't it? So they'd have to do very well from here.
Yeah, they've got 34 points. They're not even halfway to 70 points yet, are they? And there's only 20 games left. Yeah, it does feel unlikely, but it is a strange division. There's a lot of teams cannibalising each other, isn't there? Bristol City seemed nailed on just a few months ago, and now they're down in 10th. Stoke were automatics a couple of months ago. They're down in 8th, but they're resurgent again, having won a couple. Millwall and Preston are still hanging around, aren't they? We're all sort of looking at what can Stoke do? Can QPR mount a surprise challenge? And still, no one's talking about Preston and Millwall, and they're still there. They're just a point. Yeah, I think they're both only a point behind Ipswich, aren't they? It'll be interesting to see what happens with Coventry now, because they are having a little bit of a wobble. Albeit they've built up a really healthy buffer at the top of the league. They are now 8 points clear of third, and let's face it, they only need to finish in the top 2 rather than first. It doesn't matter if Middlesbrough or Ipswich catch them; they just need to be in that top 2. But yeah, it is interesting. Just going to throw it out there. Are we even slightly concerned about the 10-point gap to Norwich in 22nd? No,
I think there are enough teams down there in this league that are way short of what Blues have got. So yeah, I'm not worried about relegation at all. I know some fans were a little bit concerned over the Christmas period before the Coventry game, but I'm not thinking about relegation. I'm not massively thinking about the playoffs at the moment either, but I'm more playoffs than relegation.
Yeah. Right, let's clip this and make sure we can hang ourselves in May when it goes down to the final day. Be interested. Leave your thoughts and your comments about what you think Blues might do for the rest of the season. Is it going to be a 3 or 4 months of struggling away in mid-table or battling away in mid-table? Alex, let's quickly turn to the transfer window. We've talked about potentially Leonard and probably Dykes leaving. Erin Cashin seems to be another one that's likely to leave, right?
Yeah, Cashin. There was a story over the weekend, I think, about Blackburn being interested in Cashin. That was something that we're aware of as well. Blackburn play a back 3, and they've been playing a youngster at left centre back for the majority of the first half of the season. So that is one that does make sense. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Cashin was called back. But I must say, Aaron, before I choke, Aaron Cashin has been a really good professional. To be fair, I mean, around the training ground, I've only heard good things about him and the way that he's played over this Christmas period and filling in at left back and coming on at centre back and doing very well against Coventry. I think it's credit to him and reflects really well on him. So obviously it's not worked out from that Sheffield Wednesday game when he first came into the team at Blues, but I'm sure he'll go to another championship side and do well second half of the season.
He was never as bad as he looked in those first couple of games for Blues. Brighton don't get a lot wrong in the transfer market, and they saw fit to give Derby 9 million for Aaron Cashin. And it was... He came on when the sands around him were sort of crumbling a little, the foundations around him were crumbling a little bit as well, and it looked horrible. But he was never as good. He was never as bad as he appeared in. Was it Coventry as well? I think. He struggled against Coventry as well, didn't he? I think he's a perfectly serviceable Championship centre back, albeit I think, as you say, the left side of a 3 rather than the left side of a 2. The other one, I suppose, is Patrick Roberts. That would be good in terms of freeing up a loan space if they could turn that permanent. I thought there were moments in the game yesterday where Patrick Roberts' class just absolutely shone through.
I think Roberts is excellent. I'm at risk of contradicting myself here because I've been kind of a little bit frustrated by the age profile of some of the players that Blues have signed.
Just going to raise that as well. Yeah,
and Roberts, I think he's 29 or coming 29 soon. So again, if you're giving a player of 29 a 2-3 year contract, it doesn't really, get me massively excited. But having watched Patrick Roberts for the first half of this season, having watched him in the Championship over the last few years, he's top drawer in this league, isn't he? So, you can't always sign 23, 24-year-olds, can you? I think you've obviously got to have a bit of experience. And of all the players, the ageing players that Blues have signed or will sign, I think Roberts would be right up there as one of the better ones.
Well, he's what I was talking about earlier. He's someone who has been there, done there, and got the T-shirt and won promotion from the Championship. You are right to point out the fact he's actually going to be 29 on February the 5th. You're right to point out the changing age profile, and Blues are going older, but they're also signing track record as well. So, to go back to my point earlier about Kai Wagner, haven't really got too many issues with Roberts, and Roberts has shown himself to fit into the team pretty well so far. Listen, if Blues can get away with 2 in an option, then I'd be more comfortable with that. But yeah, he's contributed well. I don't think that you've really seen too much to say there's any reason why Blues shouldn't look to bring him here permanently.
No, and we have, on previous podcasts said of the 12 players that Blues did sign in the summer, the real successes have been Damari Gray and Patrick Roberts, haven't they? And they're both 28, 29-year-old wingers. So yeah, you can't argue with Patrick Roberts becoming a permanent player.
Any other sort of transfer tittle tattle? Any movement on Fujimoto? And I know he was the lesser spotted Kanye was actually seen in evidence against the Sky Blues.
It's remarkable.
It would be a surprise if they didn't at least try and loan him out over the next month, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff's going to happen probably next 2 weeks with the Cambridge game in the FA Cup, breaking up 2 league fixtures before Blues play Swansea on the 17th. So Kanya, I'd be stunned if he is still here second half of the season. They should definitely look to load him out because he's clearly not going to play under Chris Davies. If he can't get a game over Christmas when Blues have been as poor as they've been all season in some of these games and they've been as light as they've been all season, then he's not going to play when these players come back to fitness and are available after suspension. So I think Kanya, for the sake of his own career, needs to find somewhere else for the second half of the season.
Yeah, indeed. What about Kyogo? Do you think there's a world in which Kyogo is loaned somewhere?
I'd see that is one where
that's a podcast in itself, isn't it? Really,
it is. Yeah, player will want to play because he really wants to get into the Japan World Cup squad. Realistically, that's probably been and gone for him. I think, given what he's done first half of the season, he'd have to have an absolutely exceptional second half of the season. There's no real guarantee that he's going to play for Blues, is there? Because Marvin Ducksch has shown that he, albeit not wholly reliable, is more reliable than Kyogo has been. So if Dykes goes and they're bringing another striker, you're putting another body between Kyogo and a first team place. But they've spent good money on Kyogo. He is going to command a good salary. What team who can afford those figures is going to take him this month? I just don't think it's going to happen.
Easier said than done, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. Alex, thank you very much for your insight. I thank you all for your attention and your contributions. Please, if you haven't already, do hit like or subscribe. It helps us out no end. All that remains is for a big keep right on and a happy new year from both of us.